Imagine for a second, um, a senior software engineer,
Yeah, okay.
like someone who has spent decades in Silicon Valley,
Yeah.
working at the absolute highest levels of tech.
Right. Building the architecture for, like, the systems that basically run our modern world today.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Now, imagine that same engineer just decides to leave the grid entirely.
Oh, wow. Just completely walks away.
Yeah. They pack up, they move into a tent in like the remote wilderness, and they start a completely new off-the-grid commune.
Okay, I can picture that.
Right. But here's the thing. They might have left the glass office buildings, the servers, the traffic behind, but they can't delete the code in their head.
No, of course not. You take all that with you.
Right. To take all that foundational knowledge, all that deep understanding of complex architectural systems straight into the woods with them.
Mm-hmm.
So what if I told you that one of the most famous figures in human history, like the founding father of global monotheism, wasn't just a simple shepherd starting from a blank slate? What if he was actually the ancient equivalent of that master engineer?
I mean, it fundamentally changes the lens through which we view the origins of Western
It
civilization
really does.
because the sources we are looking at today suggest that the traditional image we hold, a man alone in the wilderness, stepping away from everything to hear a brand new voice, is essentially missing its entire first act.
Its entire first act. That's
Okay.
huge.
Yeah, we are looking at a radical re-examination of our historical timelines here. The origins of the Abrahamic world didn't just, appear out of nowhere in the desert.
Right.
According to these materials, we are tracking what they call a highly calculated cultural renaissance.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mission for our deep dive today is to explore an understanding of ancient history that is entirely outside the box.
Very much so.
We're going to follow the physical and intellectual journey of information, from ancient Sumerian clay tablets through the fireside stories of a nomadic oral archive, straight into the foundational bedrock of the Jewish religion. Specifically, the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis.
And we really have to be clear about the premise our sources are establishing right up front.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
The assertion here is that the foundational framework of global monotheism was not created in a cultural vacuum.
It wasn't just pulled out of thin air.
Exactly. It was instead an incredibly sophisticated, intentional reconstruction of Mesopotamian history and mythology.
Wow.
Yeah, it is a story of taking the raw intellectual DNA of an advanced civilization and painstakingly re-engineering it.
To build like an entirely new baseline of faith.
Precisely.
So if you are someone who is fascinated by ancient history or theology, or honestly just the mechanics of how human beings construct the narratives that shape entire civilizations, you're going to want to sit with this.
Oh, absolutely.
Because this material completely reframes the ancient world.
Yeah.
But to start this journey, we have to completely redefine our main character. We need to look at what the sources call the scholar of Haran. We are talking about Abraham.
Which is really the pivot point for this entire theory.
Okay.
The sources explicitly characterize Abraham not as a wandering nomad who just, stumbled into a revelation.
Right, which is the picture we all have in our heads.
Yeah, exactly. But they call him a Sumerian intellectual.
A Sumerian intellectual.
Yes. And they anchor this claim on a very specific, often overlooked chronological detail found in Genesis chapters 11 and 12.
What's the detail?
The text states unequivocally that Abraham left the city of Haran at the age of 75.
Okay, hold on. Let me stop you right there.
Sure.
Because we read these massive numbers in ancient texts all the time.
Oh, constantly.
And usually our modern brains just kind of gloss over them as like mythological exaggeration. But let's take the text seriously for a moment.
Let's do it.
75 years. That is an entire, robust human lifetime. Especially back then. Are the sources really suggesting he spent that entire time just sitting in a city before his story even begins?
They are suggesting exactly that, and the implications of it are staggering.
Really?
Yeah, because this isn't a young, impressionable youth leaving home to go find himself.
Right.
This means Abraham spent 7.5 decades immersed in Mesopotamian religious perspectives, in their legal systems, their cultural frameworks.
All before he ever supposedly received a command to enter Canaan.
Exactly. And in the ancient world, Haran was not some, backwater outpost.
It wasn't.
No, it was a major commercial and cultural hub. It was deeply tied to the broader Sumerian and Akkadian civilizations.
Wow.
So that equates to a full lifetime of what the sources term a Sumerian education.
I'm trying to picture what a Sumerian education even looks like for someone living thousands of years ago.
It's a lot more intense than you might think.
Because I think there's a tendency to assume ancient people were rudimentary or just simplistic in their thinking.
Oh, that's a huge misconception.
So what kind of intellectual weight are we actually talking about here?
Well, we are talking about the cradle of human civilization.
Mm.
A Sumerian education meant mastering a deeply complex society.
Oh, yeah.
Mesopotamia had sprawling city-states. They had intricate social stratifications, advanced agricultural irrigation systems.
And massive buildings.
Oh,
right?
yeah, monumental architecture, like the ziggurats. But more than that, they had an incredibly sophisticated theological and historical framework.
Right.
They possessed advanced mathematics. I mean, they invented the base 60 system that we still use for measuring time in circles today.
Wait, really? The reason there are 60 seconds in a minute is from them.
Yeah, that's straight from Sumer.
Yeah.
And they had complex legal codes, vast libraries of cuneiform writing,
Wow.
and this epic literature exploring the cosmos, the creation of humanity, the nature of the gods.
That is a lot of data to absorb.
It is. So someone educated in that environment for 75 years would have possessed a deeply nuanced understanding of the mechanics of civilization itself.
So when we picture him, packing up a tent and wandering into the unknown, we're doing a massive disservice to the reality of the text.
Exactly.
Because you don't just leave your mind behind. When his clan departed from Haran, they were effectively exporting this highly developed worldview.
Precisely. The knowledge cultivated over those 75 years didn't just vanish into the desert sand.
Right.
It became the indispensable catalyst for a radical theological shift.
Okay, how so?
Well, what's fascinating here is how the sources describe the utility of that retained knowledge. It wasn't baggage holding him back.
It wasn't just old news.
No, it was the intellectual raw material required to reshape a completely new belief system.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, monotheism wasn't invented out of thin air, it was synthesized. Abraham utilized the profound cosmological and historical concepts of his Mesopotamian background as the building blocks for something entirely unprecedented.
I could definitely see the logic there.
Huh.
I mean, you can't build a new house without materials.
Right.
And he walked out of Haran with literally the best intellectual materials of the ancient world.
He really did.
But this brings up a massive, glaring logistical problem for me.
Okay, what is it?
If you want to initiate a cultural renaissance, if you want to take the entire Sumerian system and translate it for a completely different way of life, you have to preserve the data, right?
Right, you need a record.
But the sources say he's now leading a nomadic clan. And I know a little bit about Mesopotamia, and I know they were a culture of clay.
Yes, heavily reliant on clay.
Their records were literally baked into the earth. So how on earth do you transport the immense, heavy, complex records of a civilization when you're living in tents and traveling by camel?
You've hit on the exact logistical hurdle that, according to these sources, fundamentally altered the trajectory of human history.
Seriously.
Yes, you are entirely correct. Mesopotamia's memory was inscribed on heavy clay tablets, and they were often stored in these massive, centralized urban libraries.
Right, you can't just throw a library in a backpack.
No, and Abraham's clan was not a formal political body. They had no standing army, no permanent infrastructure,
Yeah.
and absolutely no means to transport tons of clay tablets across the unforgiving terrain of the ancient Near East.
Exactly. You can't just load up a donkey with a few tons of municipal archives and head out into the desert. It's physically impossible.
It is impossible.
So what do? Do they just abandon the knowledge?
No, they don't abandon it. They change the medium.
Okay.
Because they couldn't take the clay, the sources emphasize that they transitioned to what is termed an oral archive.
An oral archive.
Yeah, they took the epic literature, the cosmologies, and the historical records, and they converted them
Converted them into what?
into verbal epics, poetry, and narratives that could be shared, memorized, and recited around communal fires.
Okay, I have to push back on this a little bit.
Go for it.
Because when modern people hear the phrase oral tradition, we instinctively think of a downgrade. We think of, like, the childhood game of telephone, where one person whispers a phrase, and by the time it gets around the circle, the information is completely degraded and corrupted.
Right, purple monkey dishwasher.
Exactly. So how is abandoning physical, permanent writing for campfire stories not a massive loss of data?
It's a very common modern bias, but it fundamentally misunderstands how ancient oral cultures functioned.
Okay, teach me.
Oral archives were not casual games of telephone. They were highly structured. They utilized complex mnemonic devices, rhythmic meter, and rhyme.
Oh, so they were built to be memorized accurately.
Exactly, to ensure accurate transmission across generations.
Yeah.
But more importantly, the sources frame this shift from clay to the oral archive not as a loss,
It was a game.
yes, as a vital, brilliant mechanism for change. They describe the oral archive as a mobile and malleable bridge.
A mobile and malleable bridge. Okay, let's go back to my Silicon Valley engineer analogy from earlier.
Okay, yeah.
Because here's where it gets really interesting to me. It sounds like the ancient equivalent of taking massive, rigid, uneditable files from a giant mainframe desktop computer.
Which would be the clay tablets locked in the city library.
Yes. And converting those files into an adaptable open source cloud format.
That's a great way to look at it.
Because when the data's on clay, it's literally etched in stone, well, baked in mud. You cannot change the text without physically breaking the tablet.
Right, it's static.
But once you convert that data into a story told around a fire, it's basically in the cloud. It's portable, yes, but because it's no longer physical, you can update the code on the go.
That is an exceptional way to conceptualize the mechanics of what actually happened.
Wow.
The physical realities of nomadic life necessitated the move to verbal epics just to survive. They had to travel light.
Right.
But the unintended, or perhaps highly intended, byproduct of making it portable was making it fluid.
Fluidity is power.
It is. And the sources are very clear on why this fluidity was essential. This malleability provided the necessary flexibility for Abraham and his descendants to reshape and reconstruct Mesopotamian origins,
Reshape them how?
according to what the texts explicitly call a self-driven agenda.
A self-driven agenda.
What?
I have to say, that phrase makes me bristle just a little bit.
How so?
Well, it sounds almost nefarious. Like we are accusing this foundational religious figure of manipulating data for political gain.
I can see why you'd think that.
Yeah, because billions of people view these texts as literal divine revelation. So
That-
how do we reconcile that with a self-driven agenda?
That is a crucial distinction to make. And we have to look at this strictly from the perspective of textual evolution,
Okay,
entirely apart from theological claims of divine inspiration.
right.
We are not taking a stance on the spiritual validity of the text.
Right, we're just looking at the mechanics of the history.
Exactly. When the sources say self-driven agenda, they are not implying a malicious forgery.
Okay, that's good.
They are describing a brilliant strategic reframing that was absolutely necessary for the survival and identity of a new people group.
So it was a survival tactic.
In many ways, yes. Think about it. If you are trying to forge a new theological path, one that moves away from thousands of conflicting gods toward a singular moral universe, you cannot remain tethered to the rigid clay documents that explicitly worship that old pantheon.
Oh, of course. Because every time you read the tablet, you're reading about the old guy.
Yeah, exactly. The oral archive gave the authors the power of the editor's pen.
That's such a cool concept.
It allowed them to extract the profound wisdom, the deep understanding of human nature and the historical memory of Mesopotamia.
But they could deliberately leave the polytheism behind.
Precisely. They filtered it out.
So they are actively editing the source code with this malleable, portable, open source oral archive secured around their nomadic campfires. So what exactly did this new baseline look like?
Well,
Like, what was the ultimate goal of this editing process?
the ultimate goal, the fruit of this transformation, is what we now read as the first 11 chapters of the book of Genesis.
Wow. The very beginning.
Yes. The sources call this a calculated cultural renaissance. The objective was to completely redefine the human story.
That is no small task.
No, it's not. And to understand the magnitude of this edit, we really have to contrast the before and after.
Walk me through that, because I want to understand what the original Sumerian baseline was that he was reacting against.
Okay, so the Sumerian worldview was incredibly broad, cyclical, and largely chaotic.
Chaotic how?
Well, their cosmology was populated by a vast pantheon of gods, and these gods were often petty, conflicted, and driven by very human-like whims.
Like they were just big, powerful, angry humans.
Basically, in many Mesopotamian creation myths, like the Enuma Elish, humanity is almost an afterthought.
Really? We weren't the main event?
Not at all. Humans were created essentially to be slave labor.
Seriously?
Yeah, to dig the irrigation canals and feed the gods so the gods could rest.
That is wild.
Furthermore, the focus of their history was entirely on the rise of diverse, competing city-states.
Yeah.
It was a fragmented view of the universe where history just repeated itself in endless cycles of political rise and fall.
That is a very bleak utilitarian view of human existence.
Yeah.
You are literally just here to do chores for the cosmos.
Exactly. You're just a farmhand for the divine.
Yeah.
Now, contrast that with the narrative engineered in the Abrahamic tradition.
Yeah.
It rejects that cyclical chaos entirely. It introduces a highly focused, singular, linear trajectory.
Okay, so it's a straight line instead of a circle.
Yes. The agenda was to shift the narrative away from polytheistic chaos and point it toward a specific national progression with a moral arc.
A moral arc.
Yes, it was an active, calculated move to create the bedrock of monotheistic thought. Humanity is no longer an afterthought created for slave labor.
Right. In Genesis, humanity is given dominion.
Exactly. Stewardship, agency, and a direct relationship with a singular creator.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it sounds like a massive structural transplant.
It really is.
Like, they took the vast, sprawling, multi-season television epic of Sumerian mythology with, thousands of characters and competing plot lines, and they ruthlessly edited it down into a tight, single narrative feature film.
That's a perfect analogy.
And that film has a very specific destination.
Yes, a destination that leads directly to the distinct identity of the Israelites.
Wow.
The DNA of the Jewish religion was formed by transplanting the deep questions of Mesopotamia. Questions about creation, the origin of evil, the nature of civilization.
And putting them into a new format.
Right, putting them into a streamlined covenantal narrative.
This all sounds great in theory, but to truly understand how this transplant actually worked on the ground around those campfires, we have to look at the characters.
Oh, absolutely.
Because you cannot have a narrative without characters. And the sources point out something that honestly blew my mind.
What's that?
The major figures in the Genesis narrative were actually ported over from the Sumerian system, but they were given brand new theological jobs.
They were repurposed.
Repurpose, yes. Let's dive into these specific archetypes, starting with the biggest one, Adam.
Okay, let's talk about Adam. This is where the mechanics of that calculated cultural renaissance become highly visible.
Right.
Because these figures were not invented from scratch in the desert. They were adapted from older, established Sumerian archetypes to serve this new linear purpose.
But wait, in the traditional view, Adam is like the ultimate blank slate.
Sure.
The first man, created from dust, placed in a garden. How is he a ported-over archetype?
Well, in the Abrahamic tradition, Adam is established as the prototype.
Okay.
But the sources note that this prototype concept was adapted from general Mesopotamian creation myths.
How so?
However, the edit is profound. In the Sumerian context, the creation of humanity was a broad cosmological event. It explained the origin of the species as a whole.
Right, like where did humans come from?
Exactly, and it was often focused on explaining why there are different types of workers in the city.
Oh, so it was almost like a justification for social classes.
Yes, very much so. But the Genesis adaptation reframes Adam entirely. It takes this broad creation figure and places him at the very beginning of a highly specific genealogical record.
So instead of a story about how the human species was biologically engineered, it becomes a story about a specific family tree.
Precisely. It changes the focus of the narrative. From a general philosophical how the world was made to a very specific linear where this particular family comes from.
Oh.
It anchors the prototype to a lineage. By doing this, the oral archive turns a universal myth into the starting gun for a national journey.
That's incredible.
Adam isn't just mankind in this new version. He is the forefather of Abraham's specific line.
That is brilliant narrative engineering.
It is.
Because if your goal is to build a distinct national identity for a nomadic people, you need a cohesive family tree to bind them all together. So you just adapt the universal creation myth into the very first branch of your specific tree.
Exactly. You claim the prototype.
Man. Okay, let's move to the next figure, because the sources emphasize this one heavily, and I find it the most fascinating. Cain.
Oh, Cain is central to this whole theory.
Why is Cain so pivotal in this reconstruction?
Because Cain represents the distillation of civilization itself.
Civilization?
Yes. The sources describe the reframed character of Cain as the architect of civilization.
Okay, unpack that.
To understand this, we have to go back to Abraham's Sumerian education. Remember those 75 years?
Right, the lifetime in Haran.
Exactly. He spent decades observing, absorbing, and participating in the complex history of Sumerian urban development.
He knew how cities worked?
Deeply.
Wow.
He understood the rise of city-states, the invention of metallurgy, advanced agriculture, and the stratification of social classes.
He basically understood the absolute peak of human technological achievement at the time. I mean, Sumerian cities were the New York or Tokyo of the ancient world.
They absolutely were. But look at what happens in the oral archive. All of that immense, complex societal history, the hundreds of years of urban development, is compressed.
Compressed into what?
It's personified into the single seger of Cain and his immediate lineage.
Oh, wow.
The texts tell us Cain went out and built the first city. His descendants are described as the first to forge bronze and iron.
Right, I remember reading that.
They're the first to create musical instruments, the first to live in tents and raise livestock.
I absolutely love this part. It's like taking an ensemble cast of thousands from a sprawling historical documentary of the dawn of agriculture and urban planning, and distilling all of that dense history into 3 lead actors in a tense stage play.
It's incredibly efficient storytelling.
But here's the thing I don't understand.
Okay.
If Abraham was so highly educated and he came from this glorious urban environment, why is the architect of civilization, Cain, framed as a murderer? Because Genesis makes the founder of the first city a man who killed his own brother out of jealousy. That feels incredibly specific.
It is entirely specific. And it is the ultimate editorial critique of the system Abraham left behind.
The critique.
Yes, the architectural sophistication and historical memory of Mesopotamia are preserved, right?
Yeah, they still talk about forging bronze and building cities.
But they are fundamentally repurposed as a theological investigation of morality.
Oh, that is so interesting.
In the Sumerian view, the city was a gift from the gods. It was the ultimate good.
But in the Abrahamic edit.
The city is founded by a man who was driven from the presence of God because of violence.
Oh.
The history of human progress is preserved, but it is deeply intertwined with a lesson on human conduct, jealousy, and the moral pitfalls of civilization.
That is staggering. He keeps the DNA of the city-state's origins, but he uses it to teach a moral lesson.
Exactly.
It's a complete critique of the empire he walked away from. He's basically saying, yes, they built great cities and forged metals, but look at the violence and moral corruption at its root. It perfectly sets the stage for a new kind of law.
It really does. It shifts the narrative from mere historical reality to a profound theological framework.
Right.
And that brings us to the ultimate catastrophic event in ancient literature.
A flood.
The flood. No.
Right. Because if Cain represents the building of civilization, how does the narrative handle the destruction of it?
Exactly.
Anyone who has taken a world religions or ancient history class knows that the Sumerian clay tablets are absolutely packed with flood records.
Oh, they are everywhere.
The Epic of Gilgamesh is the one everyone knows, but there are others, like the Atrahasis epic. Floods were a deeply ingrained historical and mythological reality for Mesopotamian culture.
They lived between 2 massive, unpredictable rivers. Floods were a constant threat.
So Abraham's clan definitely knew the flood stories.
Absolutely. The flood wasn't some new concept introduced in the desert. It was a core component of that 75-year education.
Okay, so how did they edit the flood?
Again, look closely at the narrative shift. The Sumerian flood narratives are broad, chaotic, and often morally ambiguous.
Ambiguous how?
Well, in the Epic of Gilgamesh, the gods decide to wipe out humanity simply because humans are too noisy.
Wait, what?
Yeah, they are literally keeping the gods awake. So the gods decide to drown everyone.
That's insane.
And the survival of the hero, Utnapishtim, who is kind of the Sumerian Noah, is almost an accident.
An accident?
Yeah, it's the result of one god sneaking behind the backs of the others to warn him. It's an arbitrary, chaotic universe.
A universe where you can be wiped out entirely just for being too loud.
Exactly. Now look at what the Abrahamic tradition does with this massive cosmological event.
Okay.
The oral archive takes this chaotic myth and narrows the focus razor sharp onto Noah.
Right.
Noah is adapted to be a specific moral link in what the sources call a providential chain.
So they tighten the focus from random cosmic disaster to a highly intentional moral judgment.
Yes, exactly. The narrative ensures that the intellectual DNA of the Mesopotamian source, the memory of the Great Deluge, survives the destruction.
But it survives for a different reason.
Strictly to establish a specific covenantal line. It's no longer a story about angry, sleep-deprived gods.
Okay.
It's a story about moral judgment, the preservation of righteousness, and a specific promise for the future of this particular lineage.
So Noah is the bridge.
Noah is the bridge between the antediluvian, the pre-flood world, and a brand new religious order.
It is an absolute masterclass in narrative adaptation.
It really is.
Because if you look at it from a literary perspective, they took the prototype of creation, the architect of the city, and the survivor of the apocalypse, and they strung them together like pearls on a necklace. They drew a straight, uninterrupted line from the dawn of time right to their own nomadic campfire.
And we must emphasize, this precise, calculated reframing could only be accomplished by someone with Abraham's profound Sumerian education.
Because you have to know the rules to break them.
Exactly. You cannot distill, critique, and repurpose the complexities of an entire civilization if you do not intimately understand them first.
That makes total sense.
He was extracting the highest concepts of his era, stripping away the polytheistic chaos, and synthesizing them into something entirely unprecedented in human history.
So by reshaping these archetypes, Abraham didn't just tell new campfire stories to keep his clan entertained.
No, not at all.
He fundamentally altered the trajectory of human thought.
Right.
Which honestly brings us to the final evolution of this narrative.
Right.
We need to talk about the transition from this Sumerian scholar of Haran to the figure known universally as the Founding Father.
This is really the culmination of the journey we've been tracking today.
Yeah.
We've traced his progression from a 75-year-old intellectual steeped in clay tablets, stepping out into a nomadic lifestyle.
Utilizing the malleable oral archive.
Right, and radically editing the deep archetypes of his past. The end result of this lifelong process is his eventual monumental status as Abraham Avinu.
Our father Abraham.
Exactly. He becomes the undisputed founding father of monotheism.
The sources state that the transition from the post-flood world to the emergence of global religions is rooted entirely in this sophisticated Mesopotamian source.
Yes.
But this raises a really important question for me.
Okay, what is it?
Historically speaking, small nomadic clans disappear into the sands of time constantly.
Oh, all the time.
They're assimilated, conquered, or they just fade away. So how did the seemingly insignificant task of leading a single nomadic house of followers across the desert result in the foundational framework for 3 of the world's major global religions?
It's a great question.
How did they pull it off when so many others vanished?
That is the ultimate question, really. And the answer lies in the successful integration of that Sumerian DNA.
Okay.
They didn't vanish because the oral archive they carried wasn't just a loose collection of folktales.
Right. It wasn't just bedtime stories.
No, it was a highly organized, intentional, and intellectually robust baseline of faith.
Ah, nice.
The linear progression established by these reshaped stories created a narrative gravity.
A narrative gravity.
Yes. By linking Adam, through Cain and Noah, directly down to Abraham himself, it forged an unbreakable, distinct identity for the Israelites.
Locked them in.
It provided the moral, historical, and genealogical justification that would eventually coalesce into the Law of Moses. They survived because their story was engineered to survive.
So what does this all mean for us today?
Yeah.
Because if you've ever read the earliest stories of Genesis and wondered why they feel so heavy, so ancient, echoing with the ghosts of deep antiquity, yet simultaneously they are so perfectly structured to lead right to the doorstep of one specific nation's legal and moral codes. This is the blueprint. It didn't happen by accident. It wasn't just a haphazard collection of myths. It was engineered.
He was entirely engineered.
It was constructed by a brilliant mind, or, a succession of brilliant minds, leveraging a lifetime of the highest education available in the ancient world to build a completely new reality.
And that realization demands the radical reexamination of historical timelines that we mentioned at the very beginning of our discussion.
It really does.
The traditional Sunday school narrative of monotheism simply dropping out of the sky into an empty desert, completely disconnected from the world around it.
It entirely ignores the profound intellectual labor evident in the texts themselves.
Exactly. Monotheism was an intentional, masterful reconstruction of ancient urban origins.
Wow.
The sophisticated roots of Mesopotamia were carefully transplanted, aggressively pruned of their polytheism, and cultivated in the desert to bear an entirely new kind of fruit.
It is truly staggering to think about the sheer scale of it. We started this deep dive by challenging that cinematic image of the lone wanderer starting from a blank slate.
And look at where the sources have actually taken us.
I know. We followed the journey of a deeply educated scholar in Mesopotamia. We watched as the heavy, rigid clay tablets of his youth were shed out of pure physical necessity.
Replaced by the malleable, open-source oral archive spoken around nomadic fires.
It was a technological shift in data storage that allowed for an intellectual revolution.
Exactly that. A shift that allowed for the calculated repurposing of the world's oldest stories.
Taking Adam, Cain, and Noah, the prototype, the architect, and the survivor,
Hmm.
and weaving them into a laser-focused monotheistic narrative that would eventually define the Israelites and shape the modern world.
It is the ultimate example of taking the old code to build an entirely new operating system.
It really is a cultural renaissance in its purest form, taking the very best of the old world to build the foundation of the new.
Absolutely.
It really is. And, it leaves me with a thought I can't quite shake, something for all of you to mull over on your own after we wrap up here.
Okay, let's hear it.
We've spent this entire time talking about ancient history, but this has massive implications for how we view our present.
How so?
Well, if the absolute bedrock of modern monotheism, the foundational stories of billions of people today, is actually a brilliantly adapted oral archive of ancient Sumerian archetypes.
Yeah.
What happens when we view our own modern belief systems, not as rigid, unchangeable clay tablets, but as living, breathing stories?
Oh, that's a powerful thought.
Stories that from their very inception around those ancient fires were always designed by their authors to evolve, to adapt, and to serve the people telling them.
Mm-hmm.
And if a scholar like Abraham could extract the intellectual DNA of an entire civilization to fundamentally redefine the baseline of faith for the ancient world,
Right.
what hidden, sophisticated intellectual DNA might be buried deep within the stories we tell ourselves today?
That is a vital question, and one that requires us to keep questioning the narratives we inherit.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive. We've covered thousands of years of history, text, and narrative engineering today, and we hope it gave you a completely new lens through which to view the origins of the world's greatest stories. Keep questioning the narratives, keep looking for the hidden DNA in the things you read, and we'll see you next time.